I want you to understand something before I begin. I am not telling this story for attention. I am not telling it because I want to be believed, or because I need validation from strangers, or because I have some agenda to push about the supernatural or the afterlife, or any of the things that people who tell stories like this are usually accused of promoting. I am telling this story because I have been carrying it for 6 years, and because carrying things alone, I have learned, is not the same as being strong. I am telling it because what happened inside that crematorium on a Thursday morning in March of 2018 changed something fundamental in the way I understand the world. And because the only honest thing I know how to do with an experience that size is to speak it out loud and let it exist somewhere outside of my own head. If you don't believe me when I'm done, I understand. I didn't believe things like this either once. That version of me feels like a stranger now. My name is Thomas Abiodun. I am 44 years old. I live in the Midwest, I pay my taxes, I coach my nephew's Saturday morning soccer team, and I have been in therapy for 4 of the 6 years since the events I'm about to describe. Not because I am unstable, but because processing something you have no framework for turns out to require professional assistance. My therapist, who is a careful and evidence-minded woman with no patience for self-deception, has reviewed my account of what happened multiple times and has told me, consistently, that she believes I am describing my experience accurately and that the distress I carry from it is genuine and proportionate to the events as I describe them. I mention this not because a therapist's opinion makes something true, but because I want you to understand that I have examined what happened through every lens available to me, including professional psychological scrutiny, and I have not been able to find the flaw in it. It happened. I watched it be investigated by people with far more resources and authority than I have. None of them found the flaw either. I worked as a crematorium attendant at a private funeral services facility in the Midwestern United States for 8 years, from 2010 to 2018. I am not going to name the facility, and I want to explain why. Because the reason matters, and I don't want you to interpret my vagueness as evasiveness about the facts. The owners of that facility are still operating. They are good people who ran a professional, ethical, genuinely compassionate business. And what happened on their premises was not the result of any failure on their part or on the part of their protocols. Attaching their name to this story would damage them without serving any purpose. And I am not willing to do that. What I will tell you is that the facility was licensed, audited, and in full compliance with all state and federal regulations governing the handling of human remains. It was one of the most respected cremation services in our region. Families trusted us with the final care of their loved ones. And for 8 years, that trust was honored every single day, soit until the day it couldn't be, until the day something happened that no amount of professionalism or protocol could account for. Let me tell you what a crematorium attendant actually does, because I think most people have only the vaguest idea, and the details are going to matter enormously when I get to the part of this story that I cannot explain. When a body arrived at our facility, my first responsibility was identity verification. Every body came with a packet of documentation, a death certificate signed by the attending physician or medical examiner, a cremation authorization signed by the legal next of kin, any special instructions from the family regarding the handling of the remains or the container they wanted used. My job was to verify that the body in front of me matched the documentation in every verifiable detail: name, and date of birth, any identifying marks or medical devices that needed to be noted. I initialed a verification form for every body, every single one. In 8 years, I never skipped this step, never rushed it, never treated it as a formality rather than the fundamental act of professional responsibility that it was. After verification, the body was placed in one of our 4 refrigerated holding rooms and assigned a position in the cremation schedule. Our facility processed cremations Monday through Friday, typically scheduling the first cremation of the day for 8 a.m. and working through a maximum of 4 per day, which was our practical limit given the equipment and staffing. The cremation chamber itself, in which we called the retort, which is the correct industry term, was a specialized industrial furnace capable of reaching temperatures between 1400 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. A standard adult cremation at the correct temperature took between 2 and 3 hours from start to finish. After the retort cycle completed, there was a cooling period before the cremated remains could be processed. The bone fragments that survived the heat were carefully removed, processed through a specialized processor that reduced them to the fine, uniform consistency that families receive, and then placed in the designated container. Every step of this process was logged with timestamps. The retort temperature was automatically recorded throughout the cycle. The weight of the remains before and after processing was noted. The container was sealed, labeled, and placed in our secure release area to await family collection or transport. I am telling you all of this so that you understand. This was not a casual or loosely managed operation. Every body that passed through our facility left a paper trail so thorough and so redundant that the possibility of losing track of a person in any ordinary administrative sense was essentially zero. Edmund Farley arrived at our facility on a Wednesday afternoon in March of 2018. He was 72 years old, a retired school teacher from a small town about 40 miles away. He had taught 6th grade science for 31 years at the same school, had been married to his wife Dorothy for 48 years before her death 4 years prior, and had spent his retirement gardening and babysitting his grandchildren and, according to his daughter Patricia, was driving his neighbors slightly mad by offering unsolicited advice about their lawns. He died of cardiac failure at home on a Monday morning. He was found by Patricia, who had come by to drop off groceries. She had called emergency services and then the funeral home, and after the necessary procedures had been completed, Edmund had been transported to our facility for cremation, which he had arranged himself in advance and which Patricia had confirmed and authorized through the proper channels. His file was complete when he arrived. I verified his identity personally at 3:14 p.m. on Wednesday. I placed him in holding room B at 4:02 p.m. and initialed the placement record. His cremation was scheduled for 8 a.m. Thursday. Patricia had brought a wooden box, a beautiful thing, hand-carved, that Edmund had apparently made himself in a woodworking phase he'd gone through in his early 60s, and she wanted his ashes placed in it. The box was in our receiving area, clearly labeled with Edmund's name and file number, waiting. I want to tell you about Patricia for a moment, because she is a real person who suffered a real loss in a way that still makes me ashamed on behalf of the institution I worked for. Even though I know rationally that what happened was not any individual's fault, and that shame is not a productive response to the inexplicable. Patricia Farley was in her mid-40s when her father died. She had managed his final affairs with the kind of exhausted competence that adult children develop when a parent has been declining for a while and the practical work of death has been anticipated and planned for. She was not demonstratively emotional when she came to our facility to drop off the wooden box. She was organized and thorough, asked appropriate questions about the timeline and the process, thanked me for the care I took in explaining things, and left. She had done everything right. She had trusted the right people. The thought of what she had to be told 3 days later is something I have carried every single day since. Wednesday evening, I completed my closing routine at approximately 7:30 p.m. My closing routine was always the same sequence, performed in the same order, and it concluded with a final check of all 4 holding rooms. I opened holding room B, confirmed that Edmund Farley was in his assigned position, noted the room temperature, and closed and locked the door. My part-time evening staff member, or a young man named Kevin Marsh, who had been with us for about a year, was present for this final check and initialed the log alongside my signature. Kevin and I exchanged a few words about the next day's schedule. Edmund's 8 a.m. cremation, 2 more scheduled for later in the morning, a family collection appointment in the afternoon. Then Kevin left, I finished locking up, and I went home. I ate dinner, watched television for an hour, went to bed at a reasonable time. I slept well. I had no dreams that I remembered. There was nothing in the universe of that Wednesday night that suggested the next morning was going to be the morning that broke the understanding I had built about what was possible and what wasn't. I arrived at the facility at 7 a.m. on Thursday. 7 o'clock was my standard arrival time on cremation days. It gave me an hour to go through the morning checklist, bring the retort up to operating temperature, and prepare everything before the first scheduled cremation. I went through the checklist systematically. Systems check. Heating, refrigeration, ventilation, all normal. Documentation review. Edmund Farley's file pulled and reviewed. Everything in order. Retort preheat initiated. Then I went to holding room B to begin preparation. I unlocked the door. I turned on the light. I looked at the space where Edmund Farley's gurney was positioned. The gurney was there. The sheet was there, lying flat and undisturbed on the gurney surface, completely smooth in the way a sheet is smooth when nothing has bin lying on it. Edmund Farley was not there. The gurney was empty. I stood in the doorway of holding room B at 7:04 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and I looked at an empty gurney where a man's body was supposed to be, and I felt something happen in my chest that I can only describe as a fundamental reorganization. The sensation of the ground shifting beneath a structure I had believed was permanent. I did not panic. This is something I am genuinely proud of, looking back, because the situation warranted panic and I did not allow it. I am a methodical person. Methodical people, when confronted with something that does not compute, look for the error before they look for the catastrophe. I told myself there had been an error. Someone had moved Edmund. Another staff member, a late-night authorization I hadn't been informed of. Something. I checked holding room A. I checked holding room C. I checked room D. I walked every inch of the receiving area, the preparation room, the administrative office, the garage, the supply corridor, the loading dock. I went back through all 4 holding rooms a second time. I opened every cabinet large enough to conceivably contain anything relevant. I was thorough in a way that probably looked, if anyone had been watching, like a man trying to outrun a conclusion he was not ready to reach. Edmund Farley was not in the building. I knew this with complete certainty by 7:22 a.m., 18 minutes after I had opened the door of holding room B. I went to the desk and I sat down and I spent approximately 90 seconds simply breathing, which was the only thing I could think to do that was both useful and safe in that moment. Then I called Frank. Frank Olawale was the facility director, and he had been running crematorium operations for 23 years when this happened, and he was the most professionally grounded person I have ever worked with. A man who had built his entire career on the principle that the dead deserved the same precision and dignity as the living, and who ran our facility accordingly. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I had found. I told him calmly and in order. Edmund Farley's scheduled 8 a.m. cremation, my 7 a.m. arrival, my 7:04 opening of holding room B, the empty gurney, my search of the building. Frank did not respond immediately. There was a silence of approximately 5 seconds, which was the longest silence I had ever heard from Frank in 8 years of working for him. Then he said, "Do not touch anything. Do not call anyone. I am on my way." He arrived in 19 minutes. We repeated my search of the building together. Every room, every space, including areas I had already covered, because Frank was the kind of man who needed to see things for himself before he accepted them. We found nothing. Then Frank went to his office and pulled up the security system. Our facility had cameras covering every entrance and exit, the front door, the rear staff entrance, the garage door, and the loading dock. 4 cameras, 4 angles, comprehensive coverage of every way in and out of the building. Frank pulled the footage from 7:30 p.m. Wednesday, when Kevin and I had completed the closing check, through 7 a.m. Thursday, when I had arrived. 11 and a half hours. We watched it together on his monitor, Frank leaning forward with his hands flat on the desk. It's me standing behind him with my arms crossed because I needed to be holding on to something, even if it was only myself. In 11 and a half hours of continuous footage, not one door opened. Not the front, not the rear, not the garage, not the loading dock. No vehicle approached the building. No person appeared on any camera. The footage was unbroken and unaltered. We had it verified by the security company within 48 hours, and they confirmed its integrity completely. The building had been sealed from 7:30 p.m. Wednesday to 7 a.m. Thursday. Nothing had gone in and nothing had come out. And yet Edmund Farley, who had been in holding room B at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, confirmed by 2 witnesses and a signed log entry, it was not in the building when I arrived 11 and a half hours later. Frank called the authorities at 9 a.m. He made the call himself from his office, with the door closed, and I sat in the reception area and listened to the quality of the silence on the other side of that door and thought about Patricia's wooden box sitting in the receiving area with Edmund's name on the label. The police arrived within 30 minutes. 2 officers initially, then a detective, then a representative from the state regulatory body that oversaw funeral and cremation services. Over the following 3 days, our facility was examined by a rotating team of investigators. They went through every room, every record, every piece of equipment. They reviewed all the documentation. They interviewed me. They interviewed Frank. They interviewed Kevin. They interviewed the 2 other staff members who occasionally worked at the facility. They brought in a forensic specialist to examine the security system independently. They checked whether any of our exits had been tampered with in a way that would allow them to be opened and resealed without triggering the camera system. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Their formal report, issued 6 weeks later, concluded that they had found no evidence of criminal activity and no explanation for the disappearance of the remains. The case was classified as an unresolved incident. Our facility was cleared of wrongdoing. Edmund Farley remained missing. I was present when Frank told Patricia. I had not planned to be. Frank handled family communications, and there was no professional reason for me to be in that meeting. But Patricia had met me on her visit to drop off the wooden box, and she asked, when she arrived that afternoon, if I could be there. I don't know why she asked for me specifically. Maybe I had seemed kind to her on her first visit. Maybe she simply wanted more than one person in the room when she heard whatever she was about to hear. I sat in the corner of Frank's office, and I watched Frank tell a woman that her father's body was gone, that we did not know where it was, that the investigation had found no explanation. I watched Patricia's face go through something that I do not have words for and that I hope I never watch anyone go through again. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She sat in the chair across from Frank's desk with her hands in her lap, and she went somewhere inside herself for a moment, somewhere that the rest of us in the room could not follow. And when she came back, she asked 3 questions in a very quiet voice. She asked if there was any possibility of a mistake. Frank said no. She asked if there was any possibility he would be found. Frank said he hoped so, but that he wanted to be honest with her about what the investigation had determined so far. She asked if the wooden box could be returned to her. Frank said of course, and he retrieved it himself from the receiving area and placed it on the desk in front of her. She put her hands on it and held it for a long moment without speaking. Then she thanked us for our honesty and she left. Oh, she was the most dignified person I have ever seen in the worst moment I have ever witnessed. And I have thought about her almost every day since. I continued working at the facility for 14 months after Edmund disappeared. This surprises people when I tell them, and I understand why. But leaving immediately would have felt, to me, like abandonment. Of Frank, who needed experienced staff during an extraordinarily difficult period, and of the work itself, which I believed in and which did not become less important because something impossible had happened inside the building where it was conducted. So I stayed, and for 14 months, every night when I completed my closing routine, I experienced something that I have told almost no one about until now. It was always in holding room B. That specific room, not the others. Now I would complete every other step of my closing routine first, working my way through the building in my usual sequence, and by the time I reached holding room B, the feeling was already there, waiting for me, the way a change in atmospheric pressure waits for you when you walk from one room into another. I have tried many times to describe this feeling precisely, and I have never fully succeeded, but the closest I can get is this. It was the feeling of a room that is not empty, not in a threatening way, not in a cold or aggressive or malevolent way. The feeling of occupied air, the sense of presence that any person who has walked into a room and known before they looked that someone else was in it, that specific animal awareness of shared space. I felt it every single time I opened the door of holding room B for 14 months. I want to be very clear. I never saw anything. There was no apparition, no figure, no shadow or shape or visual phenomenon of any kind. The room looked exactly as it should look. Clean, lit, empty, refrigerated, the gurney in its position, the walls bare. What was there was entirely non-visual. It was atmospheric. It was the quality of the air and the specific character of the silence, which was different from the silence in any other room in the building in a way I cannot quantify, but that I was absolutely certain of every time I experienced it. I stood in the doorway of that room on closing time after closing time, and I felt what I felt, and I wrote it in no log and told no colleague and carried it home with me every night and set it down on my kitchen table and looked at it while I ate dinner and then carried it to bed and tried to sleep around it. What the presence in holding room B felt like after 14 months of careful attention was this. It felt like confusion, not distress. I want to emphasize that because I think it matters. Not fear, not pain, not anger, confusion. The particular quality of someone who does not fully understand where they are or what has happened, who is caught between one state and another, who is waiting without entirely knowing what they are waiting for. And underneath the confusion, underneath it, not replacing it, there was something that I have spent years searching for the right word for, and the word I keep arriving at is patience. A quality of waiting that was not anguished, that understood at some level deeper than confusion, that the waiting was part of something larger and that the larger thing was proceeding as it should. I left the job in May of 2019. I gave proper notice, completed a full transition for my replacement, and left on good terms with Frank, who thanked me for staying as long as I had, and who, in our final conversation over coffee in his office, said something that I have thought about many times since. He said, "Some things happen in this work that the work itself cannot hold." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. No, I shook his hand, and I walked out of that building for the last time, and I did not look back, because I had learned over 14 months that looking back at that building from the parking lot at night produced a feeling I could not afford to indulge on a regular basis. Patricia Farley hired a private investigator about 8 months after her father disappeared. I know this because the investigator contacted me as part of his work, and I cooperated fully, answering every question he had and providing him with whatever documentation I was authorized to share. He was a thorough and intelligent man, and he spent 4 months working the case. He found nothing that the police and regulatory investigations had not already found. He contacted me one final time to close out his involvement and to say, even with the kind of professional honesty that I respected, that he had no explanation to offer Patricia and that he was sorry. I told him I was sorry too. I meant it more than I could say. Edmund Farley has never been found. I am going to say that sentence one more time because I think it requires the weight of repetition. Edmund Farley has never been found, not by law enforcement, not by private investigation, not by any search or inquiry conducted in the 6 years since that Thursday morning. He arrived at a locked building, was confirmed present by 2 witnesses at 7:30 p.m., and was gone by 7 a.m. the following morning, with no door having opened and no camera having captured any movement. He went somewhere that our instruments cannot locate and our investigations cannot reach. And he has not come back from wherever that is. I have made a kind of peace with not knowing. This is a process that took years and that I would not describe as complete even now, but it is further along than I expected to get. What helped me most was not any explanation, because no explanation ever came, but a reorientation of the question I was asking. For the first 2 years after Edmund disappeared, the question I was asking was, how? How did this happen? What mechanism? What sequence of events? What gap in our protocols or our understanding of physics or our documentation of reality produced this outcome? That question has no answer. I have accepted that it has no answer. The question I ask now is different. The question I ask now is, what does it mean that the world contains things that happen outside the boundary of what we can explain? And the answer to that question, while not comfortable, is at least genuine. It means the boundary is not where we thought it was. It means there are mechanisms of existence that operate outside the range of our current instruments. It means that the framework we use to understand reality is a human-made thing. And human-made things have edges, and sometimes something falls off the edge. And the honest response to that is not to pretend the edge doesn't exist. If Patricia reads this, and I do not know if she will, I do not know if she would want to, I want to tell her something that I have wanted to tell her for 6 years, and that I was not sure how to say without it sounding like the kind of thing people say to bereaved families when they have nothing useful to offer. In holding room B for 14 months, what I felt was not suffering. I need her to know that. Whatever trace her father left in that room, whatever quality of presence persisted there after he went wherever he went, it was not in pain. It was not afraid. It was confused, yes. Disoriented in the way of someone between states who does not yet have full understanding of what has happened. But it was patient. It was so specifically, so quietly, so completely patient that the patience itself felt like a kind of message. Tana, like something being communicated deliberately across a distance I had no instruments to measure. I do not know what Edmund Farley needed to wait for. I do not know if the waiting is finished. I only know that for 14 months in a refrigerated room in a building in the Midwest, something that felt like the essential character of a man, his patience, his willingness to wait, his fundamental okayness with the fact that things take the time they take, was present in the air every night when I closed up. And that whatever else I cannot explain about any of this, that specific thing felt real and felt important and felt somehow like exactly what I would have expected from a man who had taught sixth grade science for 31 years and who had made his own burial box in his 60s and who had spent his retirement giving unsolicited lawn advice to his neighbors with the cheerful persistence of someone who believes that good things are worth repeating. I do not go back to that building. I have driven past it twice since I left, both times by accident, and both times I kept driving without slowing down. Frank retired 2 years after I left. The facility was sold and is now under new ownership and new management. And I do not know whether the new staff have experienced anything in holding room B, or whether whatever was there has moved on, or whether the whole thing existed only in my perception, and I am simply a man who had an experience he cannot explain, and who has built a story around it because that is what humans do with experiences they cannot explain. I hold all of these possibilities simultaneously. I do not know which one is true. The not knowing after 6 years has become something I can sit with, something that is part of me now, that I have stopped trying to resolve and started trying to simply carry with the same patience that I felt every night in that room. Edmund Farley went somewhere on a Thursday morning in March. Wherever he went, he left something behind that lasted 14 months, and that I am still, in my quieter moments, aware of caring. I am grateful to him for the patience. I hope, wherever he is, that the confusion has cleared. I hope that what comes after whatever happened to him in that building has been kinder and more comprehensible than the in-between part that he, or whatever remained of him, had to pass through. I hope Patricia has found some way to hold the absence of an answer without being broken by it, because she deserves that, and because the man who made her that wooden box clearly raised someone strong enough to try. That is my story. That is all of it, as honestly as I can tell it. Make of it what you will. I have made of it what I can.